The Augustan Age refers originally to a flourishing period of Latin literature during the reign of Emperor Augustus, from 27 BC to 14 AD. Marked by civil stability and imperial patronage, this era saw a burst of refined poetry and prose, focused on patriotism, personal themes, and formal perfection. The Augustan Age can be divided into three different ages of Latin literature: the Golden Age from 70 BC to 18 AD, the Silver Age from 18 AD to 133 AD, and the Post-Silver Age. The Golden Age can be split into two: the Ciceronian Age, which lasts from 70 BC to 43 BC. It is marked by orators and prose stylists like Cicero, who advanced Latin's expressive power. From 40 BC to 18 AD comes the Augustan Age, which focused on poetry. Writers like Virgil, Horace, Propertius, and Ovid flourished under Augustus' patronage. The key traits of the Golden Age of Latin literature is that they followed a polished musical verse. Classical ideas were followed, so the goal was not to say new things, but to say old things better, and for this, techniques like alliteration, rhetorical figures, and onomatopoeia were used with balance. Subtle imperial praise was also practiced, but not crude propaganda. This changed in the Silver Age, where literature became more stylistically ornate, but emotionally restrained due to increased imperial control and censorship. Poetry became more clever and structured, reflecting the polished but cautious spirit of the age. The tone became more epigrammatic, or concise, sharp and cynical. Eloquence shifted from political forums to rhetorical schools. Sharp and cynical. Writers like Seneca, Juvenal, and Tacitus expressed indirect political criticism. The Post-Silver Age was seen as Roman pride waned, because now many authors began writing in Greek. Christian writers and poets like Prudentius gradually rose to prominence. Literature became increasingly academic, philological, and precious, losing some of the organic energy of earlier ages. Notable later Latin figures are Ausonius, Claudian, and Apuleius. By extension, the term Augustan Age is also used to describe a classical period in English literature, particularly the early 18th century, from 1700 to 1745, when writers like Pope, Swift, and Addison emulated Roman literary ideals of order, reason, and stylistic elegance. The first half of Enlightenment is called the Augustan period. Augustan literature is thus a style of British literature produced during the reigns of Queen Anne, King George I, and George II in the first half of the 18th century. This was an era of neoclassicism in England, when English writers emulated and were inspired by the classical writers of the Roman Emperor Augustus's reign: Horace, Livy, Ovid, Propertius, and Virgil. A time of literary invention, it saw the development of the English novel in Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe in 1719, the expansion of satire with Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels in 1726, and the focus on the ideals of order and control. The illustrated translation of the Iliad of Homer by Alexander Pope by no means meant that he was limited to purely translation. He also produced an edition of Shakespeare's work, helped to establish the emerging industry of literary criticism, and experimented with epic poetry. As one of the leading literary figures of his day, Alexander Pope's neoclassical influences soon spread. A man passionate about both poetry and hunting, his most famous work is the epic poem The Chants, first published in 1735. This poem, essentially a history of hunting in England, builds on the classical theme of Augustan poetry, as in Somerville pioneered an early English Georgic. Considered to be the poet Virgil's second major work, the Georgics also has a pastoral theme focusing on agriculture. This is the reason why this era also saw the rise of the pastoral and the picaresque novel. I talk more about these kinds of novels in my lecture on British novel and its rise, which you can find here. In traditional literary histories, English language satire produces its greatest works in the late 17th century and the early 18th century. A half-century after the death of Ben Jonson, John Dryden oversees the rise of the era, and his 1693 discourse on satire enunciates its aesthetic principles. Jonathan Swift, Alexander Pope, and their circle occupies the pinnacle. The 1720s see the publication of Swift's Gulliver's Travels, Pope's Dunciad, and John Gay's Beggar's Opera, major works in fiction, poetry, and drama written by three close friends. By mid-century, Samuel Johnson is presiding over satire's decline, as the novel and a poetry of sensibility turn away from satiric values. In this account, Enlightenment satire in Britain belongs first of all to the coterie of Swift and Pope, sometimes called Tory satirists because of their politics, Augustans because of their admiration for the writers of the early Roman Empire, or Scriblarians because of their collaborative work on the memoirs of the fictitious Martin Scriblerus. These men were conservatives, partisans of the ancients over the modern, proponents of neoclassical values of order, decorum, and refined wit. In writing satire, they relied on a set of shared norms whose violations could be easily recognized and ridiculed. They were in many ways conservatives, insistent that only a traditional notion of virtue could regenerate a corrupt social body. Yet in a wider sense, our picture of Enlightenment satire has been transformed. The conservatism of the canonical figures now appears complex, even paradoxical. Swift's Tale of a Tub and Pope's Dunciad may attack modernity for its bad ideas and bad literature, but in parodying their targets, they reproduce rather than eradicate a chaotic modern world. More broadly still, the old roll call of great names can no longer be said to represent the immense variety of the period's literature. There are majorly three types of satires. The first one is Horatian satire, whose tone is light, witty, and amusing. The purpose is to gently mock or correct human follies with humor. For example, Alexander Pope's The Rape of the Lock. The second is the Juvenalian satire. Its tone is bitter, harsh, and morally outraged. The purpose now is to attack vice and corruption with scorn and indignation. Example, Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal. The third is Menippean or Veronian satire. Its tone is intellectual, philosophical, and often fragmented. The purpose is to ridicule mental attitudes rather than specific individuals or institutions. For example, Jonathan Swift's A Tale of a Tub and Gulliver's Travels. Prose narratives by women, such as Della Riviere Manley's New Atlantis and Erza Haywood's Memoirs of a Certain Island Adjacent to the Kingdom of Utopia. They were previously cordoned off from the roles of satire as amatory fiction, secret histories, or chronicles scandaleuses. But they were now seen to deploy Menippean tropes, such as island utopias, dialogues among gods, classical illusions, display of erudition, which is the display of knowledge, digressive and interpolated tales, a mixture of prose and verse, topical political attacks, and condemnation of luxury and promiscuity. Furthermore, cheaply printed popular forms, such as broadsides and lampoons, were now seen as important features of the satiric landscape. Broadsides were large, single-sheet prints used for announcements, news, and popular literature. Lampoons, on the other hand, were often satirical or critical commentaries, sometimes in the form of drawings or written works. According to Ashley Marshall, the most influential satire of late 17th century was not a mock heroic poem by Dryden or Samuel Butler, but a ballad, Thomas Warton's 1688 anti-Irish broadside, Lillibulero. The era also launched a century-long vogue for graphic satire in the work of William Hogarth and his late-century inheritors Thomas Rowlandson and James Gilray. Satirical prints both social and political in context, decorated middle-class homes, while violent personal vendettas were expressed in prints and counterprints. Acknowledging this variety of writers, works, and context enlarges our picture of the era, but it makes generalizing about it far more difficult. Before we move ahead towards the various parts of the eras that became important, it is important to talk about the subgenres of satire. The first one being imitation. Imitation is a broad technique where a writer mimics the style, tone, structure, or content of another work, genre, or author. The tone can be neutral, respectful, or satirical. Often it is used to learn from or pay homage to, or to critique the original. That means that all imitation is not satire. But if it is using to critique the original and it's exposing the flaws of the original indirectly, then that is satire. Now we can use imitation as satire using different forms of imitation. The first one being parody. Parody imitates the style of a particular writer or genre with exaggeration for comic effect. Pastiche. Pastiche is also a form of satirical imitation. It is a patchwork imitation combining various styles or genres to mock or critique their original context. Satirical allegory, also known as fictional imitation. It imitates real-world ideologies, figures, or systems through fictional parallels to unmask underlying hypocrisy or folly. Now, apart from imitation, we have some other subgenres of satire as well. These include burlesque, which ridicules by treating a trivial subject seriously or vice versa. It can be high burlesque, where low subject is put in a high style, or low burlesque, where high subject is put in a low style. They're given their names according to the style used: high burlesque for high style, and low burlesque for low style. Farce. Farce is a type of comedy that uses exaggeration, absurdity, and physical humor to entertain the audience. It often involves ridiculous situations, improbable events, stereotyped characters, and slapstick. Sometimes it will try to mock social norms or human folly. But it doesn't always have a deep moral message. It can be purely for entertainment purposes. Mock heroic, also known as mock epic. It's a form of burlesque that uses the elevated language of epic to satirize trivial subjects. For example, Pope's The Rape of a Lock and Fielding's Tom Thumb. Irony. Irony means saying one thing but meaning another. Irony is the foundation of most satires. There are 3 types of ironies. Verbal irony, when someone says the opposite of what they really mean. For example, saying lovely weather during a storm. Over here, the speaker and the listener both will understand the irony. Dramatic irony, when the audience knows something the characters do not. For example, in a horror film, the audience know that the killer is hiding in the closet. So here, the audience, but not the character, would understand the irony. Situational irony, when what actually happens is the opposite of what is expected. For example, a fire station burns down. Over here, everyone, including the situation itself, is ironic. Next, we talk about exaggeration, or hyperbole, which is the deliberate overstatement to highlight absurdity. For example, I shall now therefore humbly propose my own thoughts. The line used in a modest proposal. Understatement or litotes. It's the opposite of exaggeration, making something seem less important to mock it subtly. For example, describing cannibalism as a modest proposal. Caricature. Exaggerating features or traits of a person or a group for ridicule. Invective. Direct insulting language attacking individuals or institutions. This is specifically used in Juvenalian satire. Wit or wordplay. Clever language that amuses while critiquing. This is often found in Horatian satire. The Augustan Age was followed by the Age of Johnson, which lasted from 1745 all the way to 1798. Even though satire occupied a large part of the Augustan Age, it wasn't the only genre that had been popularized by that time. Other genres like pamphlets and progress poetry emerged. To know about the other genres that emerged during the Augustan Age, have a look at these lectures.